All right. We also have some overlap.
Emily's gonna
Emily's gonna do this one.
Yeah.
Pass.
But if you want a PowerPoint karaoke, I am all for it, and I feel like that's an energy we can bring to these.
Welcome everyone to today's Ask and Praxis. It's July 26th. We have a team here except Todd, and well, we won't miss him a ton, but hopefully he'll be back next time. Today we're going to talk about changes to the home and start experiences Microsoft 365. So as we've started doing regularly, we're going to take a maturity model approach to start our discussion, and then we're going to do an overview of each of the start experiences and sort of talk through each of them and how they're changing and what's different and what's coming, and maybe I'll have a little minor customization option to chat about at the end. So let us start. Em, you're going to take us through maturity this time instead of Mark, so take it away.
Em's more mature than I am.
That's obvious.
So as you know, we talk about the maturity model very often in this group. For those that are newer, as we go through this maturity model, these levels aren't necessarily indicative of what is best. Of course, it will depend on what is right for your organization. Many organizations can be happy at the 300 level, as an example. So a lot of what we see starting at the bottom of the maturity model, starting with our 100 level, we're seeing people who have just siloed site collections. Maybe someone made a site collection to solve a problem. They're not really connected to each other. There's no navigation or centralization of content. They're just our standalone solution, communication, collaboration spaces. As we move up to the 200 level and we're starting to mature the organizations and teams, this is a great opportunity for organizations to use that Viva Connections home experience. It's before you've maybe developed out a more extensive intranet communication site to serve as your starting place. It can centralize all of the different news across your different sites, as well as conversations in Viva Engage. And of course, it'll bring over any of that navigation that you push out to the SharePoint app bar as well. Then around the 300 level is where we see most organizations land and really start to be very successful. This is when people start to define things like hub sites, maybe even associated hub site structures, and they're really starting to build out that classic home experience. Now, very often our home experiences are related to our intranet, so you'll hear me use those a little bit more synonymously as we go throughout up these levels. Once we hit that 400 level, we are starting to see people use things like the home site capability. So we're declaring one of our sites as a home site and we're surfacing that in Viva Connections, and we can use PowerShell to choose that to be the primary home experience. So we've done all of our work to define what's important to our organization, and we've made it available to everyone to start from right there within Microsoft Teams. Last but not least, a couple weeks ago, we heard the release of multiple home sites. So this gives us the ability to push this even further up to the 500 level, where we can have multiple home site experiences based off of some of those task-based needs. So we can have different audiences starting in different places.
Cool. And so now you're going to talk about the update to the SharePoint start.
So yeah, one thing you might have noticed in that maturity model, I did not once reference the SharePoint start page. It is not really common for organizations to use this as their centralized home experience to train people to go find content on the intranet. There has been an update on the roadmap where they're calling out, and just to quote the post, they are aiming to inspire content creators to use their platform. So as you look at SharePoint Start right now, we can see there's a couple of different elements here rolling up where we have news, sites that we're following, and things that we've saved for later. But that create content is really, really tiny, just those two buttons in the top left. So given this post and this rollout in September, we can expect that this area is going to be changing a little bit. So I would start referencing this one as to not be part of our home family as we're referencing all our other places.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So Derek, you are going to help us understand what the Viva Connections piece of this is. Oop, you're on mute, Derek.
No, he's not.
He's decided he's not. Right, miming
yes.
the Viva Connections.
We're going to mime and then we're going to do interpretive dance. So speaking of the roadmap, there are really there have been two things on the roadmap. The first being the update to the Viva Connections desktop. And if you don't know the Viva Connections desktop, that's sort of the concept and the ability to bring your intranet into teams where your folks are working. This roadmap came out actually towards the middle to end of last year, announcing sort of a new landing experience, really focusing on Viva, the Viva suite of tools, and then also in, sort of putting out there some new experiences for the users to get access to more information. Most recently, there is a new roadmap item, which is slated to say that they're starting a rollout in September, but the one black dot indicates that it's still in development. So there's not a whole lot specifically for this one, but we can imply that there's new things coming out in addition to what's already started to roll out. So if we go to the next slide. So Viva Connections home experience was first rolled out as the ability to bring that intranet in, the left side of that, the left side of this screenshot. So this is your intranet. You can bring that inside of Teams. You've got your dashboard with your adaptive cards and so forth. The new experience, which should be in most tenants today, is on the right-hand side. And that really provides a set of navigation elements to all the Viva suite of tools. So Engage, Learning, Insights, Goals, etc. Also, it's surfacing that content that Emily showed on the SharePoint homepage, like feeds, frequent insights, as well as navigation. In addition to that, we also have the dashboard, which is access to all those adaptive card extensions.
Which is your fun area.
Which is, yes. Oh, all right. We also have some overlap.
Emily's gonna
do this one.
Yeah.
Pass.
But if you want a PowerPoint karaoke, I am all for it. And I feel like that's an energy we can bring to these. So now that Derek showed us on the left side, we see that Viva Connections home experience. And on the right side, we have the SharePoint Start experience. With our colored boxes, you'll see I am matching similar content that we have. So we don't know a lot about what's coming with that new SharePoint Start experience, but seeing that all of the news is brought over in that green box, all of those sites are brought over in that purple box, and my navigation is in the blue, as well as in that SharePoint app bar, one might think that potentially all of that space in SharePoint Start might change to more align with that content curator, which they're talking about in the roadmap announcement.
Cool. So now we have both of those things, and I think we're going to drop back into this new adaptive card extension things that have happened. So that's probably the confusion we had there for a second.
Yeah. So the latest version of the newest version of SPFX right now is 1.18. It's in beta. I think we're slating for what, Julie? Somebody's slating around August, September. Yeah,
I think September.
But with that, we're getting a bunch of new card layouts for these adaptive card extensions on the left. These get surfaced in your Viva Connections home and on your Viva Connections dashboard. The new layouts are things like a header with a text box, a search box, and a more generic layout. The search box is really great. The text box is really great because previously, in order to get any sort of user interaction, we had to have sort of one of these cards like the cafe menu with a button that then opened a larger view. Now we can interact direct with our users in that initial card view. We're also getting some customization to create custom layouts. Now, because these are really limited, we're not going to get a whole lot of flexibility, but we can start to mix and match different components that can go in different slots. And we're also getting an update to the adaptive card framework, which will let us use the execute action instead of being stuck several versions behind. And we have a lot more flexibility with the execute action. So anytime you click on a button or execute any interaction with the user, the execute action will fire, and then you can hook in your customizations there.
Cool. All right, so let's move on to the SharePoint home site. Mark, you're going to talk through some of this.
Hey, because I got a giant purple thing on the page there, so that's definitely me. So the SharePoint home site is a thing that's been around for quite some time. We've been able to declare a certain site within our tenant as the home site. We typically use the root site because that sort of makes the most sense as the landing place for people to sort of start their day, their journey through your intranet generally from that particular site. And the way that we would set that up, it had to be PowerShell for a while, but now you can do it in the SharePoint Admin Center just by going to Settings, and then there's a setting for home site, and you can see that we've got our root site set as our current home site. There's also a Viva Connections way to set this in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center by going into Setup. And you'll see a Viva tile, and you can click in and start adding Viva Connections experiences, which is a different phrase than home site. But each of those becomes a home site that you can then audience target to specific subsections of your organization. You notice that I created 2 there and didn't audience target them. They're both available to everyone. You can also sort of set them up, as you can see, to be enabled or draft. So there's a little bit more control there through the UI as to how you want those home sites to be available and who you want to be able to get to them. You can also, interestingly enough, with that UI, you can also decide that you want to change the which home site people see based on their license type. So, for example, all the E3 people could land in one home site, and all of the kiosk licenses could land in another, which makes some pretty good sense. So why do we care about home sites? What are they? Well, they're that landing destination that I talked about. They tend to be a news hub. We can actually put the news web part on any page and have it roll up content from anywhere. But Microsoft sort of spins the home site as being a news hub and an entry point to the intranet. So the superpowers that a home site gets over a regular communication site or a hub site is that it can be connected into the Viva Connections concept, which is something that we've already talked about a little bit today. But a home site can be a place that Viva Connections points to get people to a central location. It's one of the only places that, without running some PowerShell or something, doing some sort of out of the box things, or not out of the box things, where you get a tenant wide, not tenant side. That's my mistake, not yours, Emily. Search scope. It also is automatically an organizational news site, which means that it gets that sort of special visual treatment for any news stories that are posted to that particular site, so people know that that news carries a little bit more weight. It's also where you do the global navigation configuration. So when you want to have a navigation scheme that is omnipresent across all of the sites in your tenant, SharePoint sites in your tenant and in Teams, that's where you configure that. And then finally, it's the place where you land when you tap or click the home icon on mobile.
Cool. Those are a lot of superpowers, and I think keep those in mind because we're going to kind of come back to them. And Casper asked in the chat about how often do you see the home site as a hub site, and Emily answered quickly about 100% in her experience. Mark, do you have any different things to add?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that it's just sort of natural that it becomes a hub site almost before, or sorry, I'm not sure what I just said. A hub site almost before it becomes a home site. We're building it as a hub site, associating sites with it, and then it becomes a home site when we actually launch it.
I think that's probably even more common now that we have nested hub sites, right? Because you're sort of starting to get that site structure. And so then it really naturally lends itself to that, where maybe before, when you could only have one level deep, it was a little more transient. So as I said, keep in mind those home site superpowers. I want to come back to that idea when we move forward a little bit, but let's first quickly just playing the part of Todd today will be me. We have some PowerShell commandlets that are the ways that you get these home sites set. So to right now, you can get a home site, so that get SPO home site or the PNP PowerShell equivalent get PNP home site. It returns that single home site URL. And once you have the multiple home sites, it's going to start showing this warning message that, you know, which one is the first one from the list. After that, we have obviously the ability to set the home site. So we have both commands there, one for SharePoint Online PowerShell and PNP PowerShell. Right now, it's supporting that single home site setup. More sites can be done in the Microsoft Admin Center. So if you want multiple home sites and you have the licenses to support that, so you've paid for your Viva licenses, then you can set up the multiple home sites in the Microsoft Admin Center. Apparently later it will extend. And then to remove the home site, you have those same commands, initially not supported for multiple home sites. So you still have to use that Microsoft Admin Center to do the multiples. And it's just going to be your initial ones that you can set and remove using PowerShell.
This is stuff you typically do like exactly once. In my experience, you know, so once you've set that home site, you're not typically changing it very often. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, Casper said invoke PNP site swap. Yeah, is your friend. Yes, yes, it is.
Very important.
That's another one that you probably don't do all that often, though. Once you get it set, you got it set. So in our conversations with clients, we often kind of come across this idea of multiple home sites. And so we were batting around ideas of, well, when home sites in Teams first came out, you'd use a manifest, the very, very, very early versions of this. You'd use a manifest and you'd package it up as a Teams app. So essentially a JSON file and two icons would get zipped together and you'd upload it into the Teams Admin Center. And that's how you would create this sort of home site situation in the very early days of it, before they had the UI in the Microsoft Admin Center. And so when the released information came out about multiple home sites and that you'd need Viva licensing, we had sort of batted around the idea, well, it's just in some ways, it's just a Teams personal app that's sort of showing a SharePoint page. And so I just wanted to point out that for certain scenarios, that is still an option. So I'm demoing it here where I essentially took, we have a Viva Connections like home site. It's called Intranet. It's up in the top left of that left sort of underneath screenshot. Not that you can read it, but that is there. And then I took the same iconography and just created two manifests. One I called star1 and one I called star2, and uploaded them into the Teams app catalog, which you see the screenshot on the right of the setup policies for Teams apps. And essentially what I was able to do is create a home site feel for, and then you could audience target those particular sites. That might be useful in and of itself without having the home site extra piece. Like, if you had a workforce who, had a site that's where they came every day to like look up some information or see something, or maybe you were using learning pathways and you wanted to surface a learning pathways site or a training site as an icon pinned to the left rail, you could do that really easily using this functionality. So it was sort of that idea that you can create multiple home sites. They're not true home sites. And so that's why I was saying, keep in your head all that extra functionality that you get from a SharePoint home site, because you're not going to get that, but you are going to get this ability to have an icon with a left rail, a full screen experience to surface the page that you link to in your manifest and show that. And then on this next screenshot, you can see here that you can go in and say, hey, I want this, this app installed for everyone in this policy and pinned to the left rail. If you want it pre-pinned, you can do that. So back on this other screen, you can see the pull down of the manage users. So you can assign users to a policy. And so that essentially is giving you that same thing. You can say these users get this *1 policy, and *1 policy automatically pins that app and installs that app to their left rail. So that's a way that we can sort of give some of that feature and functionality without actually buying Viva licenses, and maybe that's enough. And I was sort of hoping that maybe Emily or Mark might have some other, like, what's the pros and cons of this? Like, is there anything else? Like, what are you really losing with that not being an actual home site that maybe makes this not something that you'd want to do? Any ideas?
Yeah, so to your point, we don't get everything. So the first thing, if we look at our list of the different home site benefits, was integrating to Microsoft Teams. You solved that, awesome. The second thing that we have is searching for content across the entire intranet. So you will lose how that native search behavior is going to be since it's not a home site. In the suite bar, you can change it if you want to. However, when you go down your hub structures and then use breadcrumbs to go back up, it won't keep the same search scope that you change in that box. So I don't recommend that. So you'll in my opinion, you would be losing that tenant-wide search. You can always run a line of PowerShell to make it also organizational news, so you wouldn't lose that. And then the other thing that you would lose is that one wouldn't be able to control that SharePoint app bar for your global nav. So as long as your other one that's declared the home site is the one that you want for global nav, maybe not so bad.
Yeah, not a big deal. So it's not like a huge loss. Casper put in the chat, wouldn't updating across, or do you mean access, be a nightmare? Do you mean access? Yeah, okay, I think I see where you're going. You're talking about like assigning users to the policy. I think you can use dynamic groups for that though. So with your Azure AD dynamic groups, you basically say, everybody in this department or whatever it might be, and then you say that's the group that has access to that app.
Yeah, I think
so
I think you'd have to be a little more inventive about how you did that sort of filtering or eventually redirecting. That filter assigning by license is sort of a cool mechanism that you wouldn't necessarily get here unless you did some hocus
pocus. The
pocus.
managed users has actually a lot of options in it, so there's some fun stuff you could do there, but I think the dynamic groups is probably the most flexible way to take that. So we're a little quick on the fly. Let me just get to the resources slide, but does anybody have any other like questions or discussions or thoughts on this topic? So Andre said, thank you so much for presenting a solution without buying a Viva suite. I'm here for you, because that stuff bugs the crap out of me.
I think
who's going to pay the
with,
$30 a month?
With a lot of this too, we keep seeing a lot of different moving parts that are sort of floating around in this ecosystem. What does home mean? Was one of the things we struggled with as we were putting this together, and Microsoft keeps sort of changing the concept of what they think of as home, and they put interesting marketing words around it, but it's for the actual end user who all of a sudden lands on something different than they're used to. That's confusing. And being able to control whether they land on something with a bunch of Viva icons across the top, or it's the home site of your intranet, or it's whatever's going to be the most productive for your end users, I think is something that's important to reason through, as opposed to just sort of taking what Microsoft does to you. And that's what some of this is.
Doesn't that come back to that maturity model, right? Like when you're more mature, you're going to sort of decide what your landing experience is going to be for your users, and thereby being able to like decide that, hey, I want to change that landing experience for my users, and I'm going to use my corporate communications or whatever it might be to sort of decide when that's going to happen and how that's going to happen. is a more mature organization versus letting Microsoft decide that, you know, this month they're going to change something, and you take it because that's what you get. You get what you get, and you
Right.
don't get upset, to quote
Well,
my kid.
And it
Speaking of
always
that,
comes back to, you know, something that Emily and I will talk about probably until our deathbed. You know, you've got to have good user needs statements. You've got to have good user stories. You know, this is not about who decides what technology to jam in front of your users. It's what do they actually need to accomplish, and what are the relative priorities of those things that they're doing. And if you have a 4-click process to get them to do the first thing that they need to do every day, that's probably not the right answer. I think Viva Connections and Viva Home, to me, falls into that. It sometimes is good, sometimes it just obfuscates the things that they actually need to do right away.
Yep.
Julie, can you flip back to the Viva Connections Home thing? There's one thing that I left out, and as we were talking about Microsoft deciding what to do for folks, I wanted to call this out. So if you notice in the top right-hand corner, the Viva Connections home experience, this is going to be the default for any new tenants that are created. When you add the Viva Connections home, this is going to be the default. If you notice in the top right, there's a little button that says the landing. That is how users can access the, thank you. That's how users can access your intranet home from there. And then you can navigate back and forth. If you want your intranet home to be the home for Viva Connections, you can do that. And there is a PowerShell script that you can do with that. I do not have that off the top of my head because that's a Todd thing. But but I just wanted to point, Todd's not here. But I just wanted to point that out, because if you go and if you don't have Viva Connections enabled today, and you go and you kick it off, the image on the right is what you're going to get.
Yeah. Now that I found out that that's going to be something that the PowerShell that you can run and it will stick, I definitely think from a maturity model perspective, back to what I said earlier, that for any customers that I have that have this Viva Connections home experience, I would probably recommend to them that they do switch that, because we spent all that time curating their home site. And to Casper's point in the chat, you know, there's governance boards and all of that around that home site experience. You made it for a purpose. You want to own it. I don't want the Viva landing page as Microsoft envisions it to be my landing page, but full props to them. At least it's something. So if you haven't even started down your pathway and you don't have a home site, at least you have this. And it is something that, you know, you can get started with, especially for smaller businesses that maybe don't have budget or whatever else. You know, getting started like that is definitely a good thing. All right, bumping back to resources. So we just have a lot here, and because I'm sharing, you can click on any of those. I had been sitting there for a while, so hopefully you clicked on any that were interesting to you. We do the write-ups pretty regularly on our site, and so you'll get all those links from our Ask Simpraxis site on the Simpraxis website. Let's just move forward. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions? Does anybody want to bring anything up? We do have like 2 minutes, but I can just wrap up. All right.
Mike Duffy agrees with us. I just want to point that out.
Well, that
it's
is
always
very
good
nice.
when Mike
Thank you,
agrees with us.
I appreciate that. All right. Well, then next time we have August 9th, we have tips and tricks for customizing PnP Modern Search. This is going to be sort of a version of something that Caleb asked for a couple of weeks ago. So we'll try to tackle some of his ideas there or needs there. See us live. So Derek is in Seattle at 365 EduCon. Mark and Todd are at CEF in Stockholm, Sweden in September. And then so Simpraxis team collaboratively runs Collab Days New England with some other folks who help us out from some of the other companies around the area. So Collab Days New England, October 21st, that's a free event. So any of our peoples on the call that are local definitely come join us for that. We'll be opening up, we are accepting sponsorships right now. So if you know anybody that love to sponsor community, we'd love to have you. So please reach out. And we'll be opening up registration in the next few days. We have our speakers almost all lined up and our agenda started, almost put together. So we are really rocking and rolling there. And as well, you can listen to Andrew Connell and myself bat things around on our show Cloud Dev Clarity. Thank you. That is all we have today, but we definitely look forward to seeing you next time on August 9th. So definitely join us, tell your friends to join us, make it a party, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask and Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.